to have one good speaker, Sri Tushar Arun Gandhi, who happens to be the great grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. We are very fortunate to have him with us. And I hope all the attendees are enjoying his speech this morning. And before inviting my co-coordinator, I want to know whether our Honorable Vice Chancellor wants to have some few lines to speak. Sir?
It is a great opportunity for Mizoram University to have the webinar of the Tushar Arun Gandhi ji, the great grandson of Mahatma Gandhi ji, and who is a well-renowned orator and also academician. It will be great opportunity to listen to him, Mahatma Gandhi philosophy with respect to the particularly pandemic situation, how Mahatma Gandhi has motivated people and the whole world. And ever since he started his journey in South Africa, he has been fighting for the welfare of the people and till he gets the freedom to India. So he is a model and Bapuji for whole world, and also many countries actually follow the Mahatma Gandhi philosophy, and also his satyagraha and non-violence activities even today. And he is a model for whole world. So we are going to listen to the great grandson of Mahatma Gandhi ji. It is a great opportunity for Mizoram University, and we are very much thankful to you, sir, for your kind acceptance and gracing this occasion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, may I call upon my co-coordinator, Dr. Babuji, to welcome the participants and even our great speakers. Babuji, take your time.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. A warm and delighted good morning to you all. Before I render my precise welcome note, let us recall the words of Bapu. He said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." These words are not only foresighted, but also persistently reminds us all that change must begin with us. On that note, I, on behalf of organizing team, extend my heartily welcome to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor K.R.S. Sambasiva Rao, sir, Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor J.K. Patnaik, sir, esteemed Chair, Professor Lalrin Tluanga, revered and distinguished Speaker, Tushar Gandhi, sir, beloved colleagues, my co-panelists, and all the delegates and diverse participants to today's webinar titled Relevance of Gandhi's Philosophy in the Context of Present Pandemic, delivered by distinguished speaker and the great grandson of Tushar Arun Gandhi ji. The topic or the theme that has been chosen for today's virtual conference is vital and appealing because it reminds us all that without embracing Gandhiji's lifestyle, wisdom, etiquettes, values, love for nature, cleanliness and sanitation, autonomy of the villages to cope with the challenges, acceptance of pluralism, non-violence, Suraj, or good governance, above all, the most needed humanitarian practices in the present context, we will be less successful in mitigating this COVID-19 pandemic. Hence, Gandhi's philosophy has become highly relevant during this pandemic situation that shuddered the world together. Well, people of India or neither world accept Gandhi's ideas and his practices in a larger scale, yet in a smaller scale, they pay less heed to the practices. However, this pandemic compelled all of us to embrace his practices. Hence, this is a relevant topic altogether that has been chosen. Well, it won't be fair on my part to put or to swallow the time that has been allotted to the revered speaker, for whom the participants, including me, are eagerly waiting. But before concluding my welcome note, let me reiterate what our Vice Chancellor already said, that we are the only university factually to witness two of the family members of the great Mahatma Gandhi, especially during Mahatma's 150th birth year. Thanks to our visionary Vice Chancellor, Professor Sambasiva Rao sir, Pro Vice Chancellor sir, and the esteemed chair, and Dr. Sualal Jangu, my co-panelists, for their efforts. With this, I once again welcome all the distinguished delegates, revered speaker, and participants. Over to the chair.
Thank you very much. Should I start?
Not yet, not yet.
Sorry.
Actually, they will give, sir, they will give brief introduction, sir.
Oh, yes.
Don't
We have
take
to
much
introduce
time.
it
Don't
to
take
the
much time.
attendees.
No, because it is not good to keep honorable chief guest such a time. No, just be very brief.
Oh, yes, yes. Now, I would like to request Dr. Sualal Jangu to introduce our speaker to the attendees.
Thank you, Professor our Vice Chancellor and Dean, the coordinator of the webinar, is Professor Talwanga, my co-host, Dr. Babuji, and our guest speaker, Tushar Gandhi. Our speaker does not need any kind of introduction. He is a well-known personality, icon, social activist, writer, and not only India, around the world, people know him. So our speaker is Tushar Arun Gandhi. He born 17 January 1960, Gangtok, Sikkim capital, and his wife Sonal Desai, and he having two children. The daughter Kasturi, as a name of Tushar Gandhi's great grandmother, and his one son Vivan is also very a kind of lawyer and a social activist. So our speaker Tushar Gandhi, he involved activities, many programs as a social activist, and he founded some NGO, civil society, devoting for welfare, empowerment to the poor people, marginal section communities. And last time I attended one webinar as a Facebook Live. I listened our speaker on his great grandmother is Kasturba. I first time came to know many things about Kasturba Gandhi, her own identity. So with these words, I welcome all participants and our most honorable guest is Tushar Arun Gandhi. And now I turn the speaker to our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janguji. Now, I would like to call upon our great speaker, to whose speech. All the attendees should pay full attention. And now, sir, take your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, respected Vice Chancellor Saab and the faculty of the university and the organizers who have been very persistent in arranging the whole program. I'm very grateful to you, and I feel privileged to be able to address your esteemed university. And you've done me a great honor of addressing you after my father has also addressed you. For me, it is a great privilege. So I thank you for that. And I welcome all the participants in this webinar and greet all of you who have so generously given your time to listen to what I have to say today. I am not a very highly educated person, neither am I a very philosophical person. I'm a very ordinary person. And, so I hope I don't disappoint you in sharing these thoughts. The topic given to me today is the relevance of Gandhi in this time of pandemic. And so I'm going to try to do justice to that topic. And, I believe that this pandemic is, if Bapu was to talk to us about this pandemic, he would have said that this pandemic is a forced penance on for us. It is time to atone for our mistakes, even though it is uh, a ailment or an illness that is beyond our control. But the reason for why it has, almost grasped all of humanity is also because of the kind of lifestyle that we have all become accustomed to and taken for granted. And so Bapu would have said that this pandemic, we also need to atone for it and realize how we have contributed to it. I'll just give you an example of since the last 2 days, um, a couple of groups of people, very well-intentioned people, I must tell you that, very well-intentioned people have been asking me to participate in their program and on 2nd October to reaffirm their belief in the Gandhian ideals. And, when I got the details, I was very shocked because they wanted to hold an actual physical program in these times, and that too in a very public sector as a kind of a demonstration. And I've been trying to plead with them that it would be a very irresponsible thing to do. But they seem to be very adamant and say that no, we must show our or pay our tributes to Bapu on his birthday, and so we must do that. But I think the greatest tribute to Bapu on this particular birthday would be in the practice of restraint, in the practice of curbing our natural instincts. There'll be many more birthdays to celebrate, many more anniversaries to celebrate, when we will be able to do everything that we desire the way we want. But this time, I think the actual manifestation of our devotion to Bapu would be in disciplining our method of displaying that worship. And that's why I would like to also compliment you that you have resisted the lure of having an actual program and utilize technology to substitute for what we cannot do in the real physical world. Having said that, I think what we must all remember is that the fight against COVID is not just the fight of the healthcare sector or the fight of the administration. It is the fight of and the responsibility of all of us. We have to become responsible. We have to take responsibility to ensure that eventually we triumph over this pandemic and come back, return back to normalcy. But while this pandemic is on, there are a lot of challenges to face which I think Bapu and his ideology would come in very handy to us and would empower us to survive this pandemic in a much better manner. And I think I would want to highlight some of those issues that were very dear to Bapu and also reflect his ideology in these very trying and very scary times that we are living through. Because what this pandemic has done in our time is that it has forced us to abandon the lifestyle that we had taken for granted so much. It has forced us to change the way we thought of life. And we don't know, even today, we don't know how long we have to survive in this. But the challenges it faces for forces upon us is, are we preparing ourselves to go back to the kind of life that we were used to, the kind, ideal kind of life that we used? Will this pandemic force a change of habit on us? Will it force a change of nature on us in the way we respond, in the way we interact? Or will we be able to say this was just a momentary phase and now we are again back to it? Because both the attitudes would be dangerous. Going back to the way of life of a consumer and an absolute selfish, greedy consumer when things become normal means we are preparing the ground for another situation of this kind, another man-made crisis of this kind. Changing drastically after this pandemic also means that we may end up having the not ideal society when normalcy returns to us. Today, social distancing and isolation is a required virtue. But it's not a trait natural to human beings in general, because human beings are social animals. And we have to keep that habit going, even while we socially distance ourselves. Fortunately for us, technology has today given us the ability to still interact with people in a very sterile manner. Let me go back to Bapu's time. Bapu lived through many epidemics in various places that he was in South Africa, in India, even in England. And in every epidemic that he countered at that time, he thought of it as his own responsibility. And although at that time too, protecting the self was very important from those epidemics. And remember, at that time, typhoid and cholera and plague were as big and as dangerous epidemics as COVID is today to us. And even at that time, one could have said that no, I need to safeguard myself and not expose myself to any unnecessary danger. But what did Gandhi do? Let's start from South Africa. In South Africa, on 4 occasions, he has mentioned in his own autobiography that there were situations of crisis which were almost like epidemics. Some were epidemics and some were almost like epidemics. And in all those situations, he realized that he was responsible to serve humanity in those times of need. And in the epidemics of influenza and plague and the minor epidemics of cholera and typhoid and those seasonal epidemics that occurred very commonly in those times, he volunteered to be in the front line of responders and caregivers. And he did all the work. He organized people, he organized teams to work with him. And they were right in the forefront of the relief work during those times. They were treating the patients, they were caring for them, they were providing them with secure facilities, they were cleaning them up, they were cleaning up the filth in the localities due to which that those epidemics were becoming more heightened. They were even helping in respectfully disposing of the dead. And all those were very vital services to perform. For all those were also very dangerous duties to perform. And he never ever said that, no, I am a common citizen. I am a lawyer, I'm not a doctor. I'm a lawyer, I'm not a first responder. I am not a relief worker, I'm not the administration. He said, as a human being and as part of the society, I have a responsibility too. And I must perform that responsibility with honesty and with selflessness. Today, we have taken the social distancing and the need for isolating and insulating ourselves to convince ourselves that, look, we don't have to do that. You look at social media and it's full of the criticism of the shortcomings of the government. Yes, the government may be lacking in the kind of work that is necessary. But is it going to, criticizing it, is it going to help us in the time of this crisis? And is a crisis the right time to criticize authorities or governments? There will be ample time to do that when everything becomes normal. Even if one wants to criticize the shortcomings of authorities and the government, the best criticism would be to step into the lacunas that the administration has and perform those and say, look, I am doing it, but you are not, through our actions rather than our words. That would be a much more positive, proactive attitude towards it. Bapu did the same thing. The government of that time was lacking, either because they were helpless or because they did not care. Because you must remember that in South Africa at that time, there was a racist kind of regime. Even the colonial regime of the British Empire was racist and partial. And so to them, certain segments of their citizens were of no consideration to them. And so if they lived or died, it didn't matter. And Gandhi stepped into that vacuum. I said that he also did it in some crisis situations which were not also epidemics. And there were two of them which he has talked about in his autobiography. Both of them were war situations and strife situations. One was the Boer War, and the second was the Zulu uprising. And see how he responded to it. He was in the midst of a satyagraha for equal rights against the colonial administration, against the colonial rulers, against the crown in Britain. But he was demanding equal rights and just treatment because he claimed to be an equal citizen of the empire. And to shame them into understanding that he represented conscientious and duty-bound citizens of the empire who were asking for their rights. He served the empire during both those strife situations. He formed the ambulance corps, the stretcher bearers corps, in the Boer War and went and served on the battlefront while the battle was going on, while the British troops were fighting the Boers, the Dutch settlers of South Africa. He and his band of stretcher bearers were right in the battlefront in the midst of the war. But because they were oath bound to non-violence, they did not take up arms. They were there as the first responders to provide relief for the injured. And they used to, in his description of it, he has written that we were intervening to provide relief for the injured while the battle was going on. Bombs were exploding all around us, bullets were flying all around, and we didn't know whether we would survive that. But we were still going over there and providing first aid to the nominally injured and evacuating the more critically injured. And in that account, it is mentioned that at times they used to carry the critically injured to the field hospitals on stretchers, more than 20 to 21 miles away from the battlefront to take them to the hospitals that had been established over there. And the uniqueness of the Indian stretcher bearer corps at that time was that they did not, although they were in the war on the side of the British, they did not limit themselves to caring only for British soldiers. Many a times it happened that he carried the Dutch soldiers, wounded Dutch soldiers, to the British field hospitals. And the doctors reprimanded him. He said, this is the enemy. And at that time, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi reminded the doctors that they had taken the Hippocratic oath, and their duty was to care for those who required care without seeing their race, their religion, or the side they were on. And the word got out on the battlefield in both the camps, the British as well as the Dutch. They said that these Indians take care of all the wounded without partiality. So let us protect them. And in the heat of the battle, the soldiers were taking care that their gunfire did not hit the stretcher bearers who were working with Gandhi. Now, this is the strong affirmation of his ethical approach in life and his not abandoning those values even at a time of crisis. We, we are very ethical in things, but we are ethical and honest when it does not endanger us. But in a time of crisis, we believe that no, survival means everything to me, and I'll do whatever I can to safeguard myself. A selfish attitude. But when we talk about Gandhi, then we must understand how selflessly he worked even in situations of strife. The second man-made crisis was of the Zulu uprising. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi again revived the stretcher bearer corps, and this time it was called the Indian Ambulance Corps. And they once again went into the battlefront. What Gandhi saw over there horrified. He saw the atrocities being committed by the colonial soldiers on the Africans in the Zulu homelands, in the tribal villages, the barbarity of their massacres, the inhuman treatment that they were meting out to the Africans, the Zulus, not caring for the injured, leaving them injured wherever they had fallen, to die of their injuries without getting any care. The ransacking of their villages, the burning of their homes and destruction of all their properties, and the atrocities committed on the women and children in those villages. And Gandhi's heart cried out. And he saw that even the caregivers were not attending to the Zulus and their needs. And there were dead bodies strewn all around, rotting in the villages in the midst of humanity. And it was traumatic to the survivors as well as dangerous for them, because there was a possibility of an epidemic breaking out because of the inhygienic conditions. And Gandhi took it upon himself to provide relief for the wounded, to take care of the living, and to respectfully dispose of the dead. But when he carried the wounded Zulus to the British field officers, he again faced the hostility of the doctors, the British doctors, even missionaries. The British missionaries turned their back towards the Zulus and reprimanded Gandhi for, and I quote their words, showing sympathy for whom these colonial people referred to as savages. And Gandhi felt extremely annoyed by this attitude, because till then he believed that the British were very just people, very human people, very civilized people. It was only then that he realized the hypocrisy of the colonialists. And he reprimanded them, and he set up his own first aid and care camps in those areas and started providing first aid and relief to the wounded, and rehabilitating those who were possessed of their dwellings and all their belongings, giving them, providing them with relief. And he was doing this all on his personal capacity. That he had no legal or official sanction on it. He did not wait for legal or official sanction. He did not wait for permission by the colonial administration to allow him to do that. He informed them and went ahead and did what he felt responsible. In the outbreaks of the plague and the cholera and things I told you, no, he did not only care for the afflicted, but he went into their homes. He cleaned them up. He cleaned their belongings. He sanitized those homes to the best of his ability, exposing himself and his fellow volunteers to the danger of being infected themselves. Many of his volunteers caught those infections. Some of them died too. But without caring for that, he provided that much needed service. We must ask ourselves today, are we doing what, even if we think that what we do is insignificant, are we attempting to do that insignificant deed also? Because remember one thing, every time I talked about I attend functions on Gandhi, somebody or the other quotes the very famous quote of Bapu, saying, "Be the change you wish to see in this world." How many of us honestly believe that if we become that change, we will make a difference? When it comes to us, we convince ourselves that no, we are insignificant, mere mortals. What difference will it make whether I do something or I don't do it? But remember, even if the individual is insignificant, the collective good that actions of individuals do make a much more different, a much greater difference than what happens when some groups start taking responsibility. Because remember one thing, that humans form these groups, the conscientious humans form these groups at the time of crisis. But an individual can act and be responsible throughout their lifetime. Keep doing things even when there is no crisis. As they say in homeopathy, act on the symptoms. Don't wait for it to become a major health crisis or an illness. And that was what Gandhi practiced throughout his life. In England, when he was returning from South Africa, another huge man-made crisis erupted, the First World War. And he immediately approached the British to allow him to revive the stretcher bearer corps of the ambulance corps, to provide relief to the wounded on the battlefields. But the British were more interested in getting soldiers for their war, whom they could use as cannon fodder and throw onto the battlefront to die for them. And so they didn't want a corps of volunteers. They would rather have those volunteers fighting their war. And so they denied Bapu that opportunity. And as a conscientious citizen of the empire, he still believed that the empire would treat him fairly in a humane manner. That belief changed post the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, when he saw the savage face of the British Empire once again after the Zulu uprising in South Africa. Once again, he saw how brutal and savage the British were actually in reality. So that is when he changed. But when he came back to India from South Africa, while he was fighting to rescue the impoverished farmers of Champaran and for the rights of the farmers of Kheda, he was simultaneously going around imploring the people to also join the British war. He said, if we want rights from them, if we want justice from them, we have to give them the realization that we will perform our duties, even if we are dissatisfied with them, even if we are agitating against them. But when they need us, as a loyal citizen, we'll do our deeds. Today, if we don't like the administration, if we don't like the government in power, we convince ourselves that we don't need to assist them. Let them commit their mistakes, and I will take advantage of that mistake. It is a violent method of response. Violence doesn't mean fighting. Violence doesn't mean merely strife. The violence of thought is much more evil than the violence of action, because you yourselves don't realize how violent and brutal you are in your thoughts, in your prejudices. And we compound that more and more and more. During this pandemic, too, look at our selfishness. Yes, when the panic stricken exodus of migrant workers happened from the big metros because they realized that they did not have a home there where they were working, and they could not survive. If their work stopped, they could not survive. And they made a dash for the safety of their villages. And India witnessed one of the biggest migrations post the partition of India. Yes, we did respond. We saw groups of people handing out water on the path. We saw groups of people handing out food on the path. But we haven't seen, after those people reached their homes, we've gone back to our life the way it was. And we are waiting for those migrant workers to come back so that they can perform the duties for us, the work that we've got so used to. I keep hearing complaints of how we don't have domestic help because everybody has gone away to their villages. We do not give them the dignity of saying that if I am isolating myself, they also have a right to insulate and isolate themselves to protect themselves. When it comes to them, we are selfish. We want them to be working for us. This does not bode good for a society. This is not a Gandhian ideal. And this attitude of selfishness is also violence. We must understand that. We've become too anesthetized to the violence we commit by our thoughts and by our apathy in action. The entire global warming and climate change situation is because of our selfishness, because of our violence against nature. And it continues. Under the guise of development, we are denuding nature even further. But we are not bothered. If my city is getting an expressway, if my city is getting a metro, if my city is getting a road that is built on the fragile ecosystem of my coast, I am selfish. I am happy because my commute is lessened by a few minutes or a few half an hours. I don't mind if the future of my children is imperiled by that. I don't mind if the ecological damage that will affect their well-being in the future is jeopardized because of my greed in the present. All these things are epidemics. All these situations are epidemics. We don't recognize them as that. But climate change and weather change is also a huge epidemic that is going to threaten our very existence in the near future. I was at a seminar where a very learned scientist was talking about ecological damage and climate change and how it threatens us. And what he said over there, a reference that he made over there, terrified me. He said, the end is certain. At one point of time, there will be destruction, there will be mass scale extinction. It has happened to other life forms. There is no reason for us to believe that it cannot happen to us. But he said what is dangerous is that much, much before that end happens, we will cross the point of no return. We will not even realize that we have crossed that point of no return because there will be no signs of it. But after we cross that point of no return, nothing that we do will ward off or prevent the eventual extinction of life. And none of us knows whether we have already crossed that point of no return or when that point of no return is going to be, because there are no signposts to tell us when that point of no return will happen. I think we must all be very scared of that. And that point of no return is going to happen because of our own actions, not because of anybody else. Nobody else is going to push us off that cliff. We are going to push ourselves off that cliff, after which there is certain destruction. Maybe we will survive for another 1,000 years after that. Maybe we'll survive for a decade after that. Maybe we will survive our lifetimes and die a natural death. So we don't care. But remember, our children will still be surviving. Our children will still be living. Our children will have inherited the world jeopardized by our own greed and selfishness. And that is our violence against nature. That is our violent action against our environment. And unless we take responsibility for that and start performing our deeds, these are all crisis situations. COVID is nothing new. It has happened so many times. In Gandhi's time, in Gandhi's lifetime, when he came back to India, a pandemic happened. The Spanish influenza outbreak. It killed millions of people the world over. At that time, there was no technology of our kind, there were no safeguards that we have today of our nature. And so nature took its course and people died. But it took quite a lot of time for the Spanish flu to become global because physical contact between people was not as easy as it is today. It wasn't as rapid. The spread of the Spanish flu was not as rapid as the spread of COVID has been globally today. And we have caused that. Most of the governments who have caught the secondary infection, they caught it because they believed that they were safe, secure from the influence of that epidemic. And so the communications and things were on, airports were functional for a long, long time till the epidemic blew up everyone's face in their homes. They were not bothered to isolate themselves. They said, no, 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 nothing will happen. Even today, we have idiotic people who believe that God will protect them from this epidemic. God is not going to send a vaccine. We needed to be more responsible. We needed to be more careful. But what did Gandhi do when the Spanish flu outbreak happened in India? He once again realized that he was responsible for the relief work and for the prevention of the spread. And so he once again, with his volunteers at the time of the Asha, he went into the forefront of the battle against Spanish flu, the relief work at the time of the Spanish flu. And in the Spanish flu, he even lost his own family members. His eldest son's wife and infant son perished in the Spanish flu. And Gandhi mourned them, but he realized that I have lost my family members, but I can do something to prevent such a tragedy from occurring for others also. This is the value and ideal of Gandhi that we must all be inspired by. I said in the beginning of my talk that this pandemic is like a penance, an atonement for us, which we need to realize our faults and our shortcomings and identify the reason for this phenomenal and rapid spread globally of this pandemic, and then try to prevent such things from happening in the future. Take the responsibility ourselves. But the isolation and the social distancing are also proving to be another challenge, a psychological challenge whose effects we don't know what it will be. As I said, we have to prepare for life after this pandemic also. And the life will have to be where we do not carry the baggage of this pandemic. Like in war, psychologists have come up with soldiers being afflicted by the post-traumatic psychological disorder, where entire nature of the human being is changed. It's an affliction. The pandemic is also going to cause similar kind of afflictions. We are seeing the rise of depression, the rise of the cost that the pandemic is forcing on us, on the entire families, on children, on grown-ups, on adults, on people living alone. If we treat this pandemic as an opportunity to meditate, an opportunity to better ourselves, to prepare ourselves for the future, it will become a boon rather than a curse on us. And I like to draw parallels with Bapu's attitude, Gandhi's attitude, when he was imprisoned in his life, whether it was in South Africa or back again in India. Bapu referred to his prisons as his temples. He used to refer to every prison that he was imprisoned in, he used to call them his temples. So when he was imprisoned after the Salt March in the Yarwada jail in Pune, he referred to it, even in his correspondence, as the address. He used to write from Yarwada Mandir. And he treated it as an opportunity, the isolation that he was forced to live under. He treated it as an opportunity for him to meditate, to look inwards, to audit his own self, to use that opportunity to seek knowledge, to use that time to find his own weaknesses and try to plan so that he could overcome those weaknesses, and use that time which he had to be creative, create things. Some of his best writings happened while he was in the prisons. Because I referred to Yarwada imprisonment. He wrote his treatise on the Gita while he was in the Yarwada prison. Many of his philosophically astute and spiritually astute writings happened in prison. Even his greatest work, which is considered to be his seminal work, Hind Swaraj, happened at a time when he was in isolation. He was traveling by ship from England to South Africa, confined to his cabin with nothing else to do. And in those 20 days, he wrote the Hind Swaraj, which is even today as relevant. It was brushed off as being archaic and being very anti-development and progress and all that. Because if you take it literally, then it is a very shocking treatise that he's written. But if you take it from the point of view of all the things that we are today suffering from climate change to disparities in our development, to the disparities that we have forced on our own nation and humanity, the world over, not only in our nation. And then we look at Hind Swaraj from that point of view, we will realize how significantly important every word that he has written in Hind Swaraj even matters today. Whenever people ask me what is the best and my recommended reading material for Gandhi to understand, I always say Hind Swaraj should be the first. Even his autobiography can wait, but one must read and understand the Hind Swaraj. And understanding is more important than reading. Sometimes we just read the word and don't bother about anything else. But in reading such literature, we have to think about what is not written literally, but what is implied in all those words. And then we can realize its timelessness. Gandhi in his life said that if I was to make divergent uh, statements on a particular issue, treat the one that I made last to be what I believe in, because my experience taught me that what I believed in the beginning was wrong, and what I now say is what is the real truth. A person who admitted that when he was asked after 4 or 5 decades of Hind Swaraj, when he was asked whether he would like to update Hind Swaraj and make changes to his treatise, he said, I will not even change a comma or a punctuation mark in Hind Swaraj, because it is going to be relevant no matter in what time period it is studied. That is his belief in that ideology. And I think that is what we must understand. That the Gandhian ideology, because it was not his own discovery, because it was not something that he invented, he just used the basic ideals that were in the foundation of civilization itself, the values on which people created societies and became social animals. He just took those ideals and values and utilized them in his efforts and in his life. And so, if those ideals have survived for so many centuries and eons, there is no reason to believe that today they would not be relevant. And that is the longevity of Gandhi's life. This is what we must understand, and especially understand in the times of this crisis that we are faced with, in the times when we feel so threatened by what is happening in our midst, in a time of pandemic, in a time of crisis. Because it's human nature that we wake up only in a crisis. We are so anesthetized to the symptoms of an approaching crisis that we don't bother. Even in this pandemic, we saw that while we were hearing about horror stories in China and in Europe, We just kept convincing ourselves that it can never happen to us. We just believed that God was going to protect us from any eventuality. And one fine day, we didn't realize till the time when our own safety was in jeopardy. And that's why this pandemic, to a large extent, is a man-made pandemic. The virus might be man-made. Time will tell us whether it is a man-made designer virus or it is a natural occurrence. But the extent of the pandemic is cent% man-made. And we will only be able to fight it if every individual human takes responsibility to counter and do his or her best to ensure that everybody else is secure, is safe, and those afflicted are cared for. And get a feeling that people care for them. It's not just offering that care, it's not just offering that relief, but assuring people that if something happens to them, there will be people, even strangers, who will care for them, who will provide that relief. That notion, that belief that somebody will care for me is a much greater panacea than the actual actions that we perform. So, in conclusion, I would just say that during crisis, as it is human nature, that we look for relief and we look for safety only when we are in a crisis situation. So let's utilize this pandemic to ensure that in future we do not again become victims for such situations, and we are better prepared to fight if such a situation ever again happens in our lifetimes. And we prepare a generation to come which will also act in that responsible manner long after we are gone. Because remember one thing, we are given this inheritance of life not to consume it only for ourselves, but to also carry it on as a legacy for our future generations. And if we don't leave that legacy better than what we found it, or better than what was bequeathed to us, at least let us ensure that we do not hand over a further damaged ecology, life, nature, whatever we want to call it. So let us take responsibilities on our hand, just like Gandhi did in his time. Thank you very much for this opportunity and the chance for me to speak to all your audiences. And I hope that I was able to convince you about this aspect of Gandhi as a responder, as a first responsible, as a responsible, selfless responder to the crisis that he faced during his own lifetime. My best wishes to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tusarji, for your thought-provoking speech. And we have received some queries and questions from the audience.
Oh.
And I'd like to request you to kindly give answers or clarifications to those questions raised by the participants as far as possible. Now, I'd like to request my co-coordinator, Janguji, to read out the questions. Okay?
Please do that.
Thank you, sir. Yes.
You'll have to remove your mute, Professor. Your mic is muted.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yes, now we have a question answer session for a couple of minutes. Yes, your lecture very enlightening and insightful, and especially the historical time when pandemic like present in the Spain, UK, and South Africa, and how they.
I have a request. 1 minute. I have a request. I'll read the messages in the comment box. I would request that since we don't have much time, you read out only the questions that are posed over there,
Yes, sir.
instead of just reading out all the comments and responses to my talk.
Yes, sir. So, sir, we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Yeah, the first question, Dipankar Jena, he asking that how our lifestyle is affecting the kind of the pandemic we have. Our lifestyle role is very important. So, what do you suggest, sir, that how with the Mahatma Gandhi ji, his lifestyle played very important role to overcome from the pandemic?
And I think my talk was an answer to this question, but I would, if I have to just concentrate an answer to this, I would say that the pandemic forces us to lead a more selfless and responsible lifestyle, a less consuming, less greedy, and less damaging lifestyle. I think that is what the lesson that this pandemic teaches us and forces us to reflect on the practices of Gandhi's ideology. Gandhi's ideology is important in how it was put in practice, not just in its words or its definitions. It is more important and relevant in how it was put into practice by him and the people of his time. And so I think that is what should inspire us to also behave in that kind of a manner in our lifetimes in this present crisis.
Yes, thank you, sir. Second question, Anil Prakash Srivastava is asking that what we can learn from Mahatma Gandhi's his own experience practices during Spanish pandemic.
And I think the lesson that we learn is to how to utilize this pandemic and not think of it as something that is detrimental to us, because its threat to us is beyond our control. We can't do anything about it. Even after our social isolation and things, there is no guarantee that we will not be infected by this virus. So it's beyond our control. But if we can still behave responsibly and behave in a less selfless manner to provide whatever we can and be responsible in our social behavior. I think that is the lesson that Bapu would have kept emphasizing on during such times of crisis.
Yes, sir. Thank you. One more question. This is related to that how the women played the role in time of pandemic, especially referring the Mahatma Gandhi when he was in the time of pandemic, and how he like motivated, encouraged women to fight against the pandemic.
I think there is no gender difference during a time of crisis. We are just human beings, whether we are men or women. We are too acclimatized to our patriarchal thought process, where we want to attribute things to women as if they were going to respond or the virus was going to affect them in a different manner than it affects us. It's not the case. We are all in the same peril to the virus. And so the response to this pandemic is much more removed from the gender differences that we have. Women will have to behave in the same manner as men have behaved, and either irresponsibly or responsibly. Fortunately for us, women are much more responsible because they are homemakers and family makers. And so, by nature, they are much more responsible than human beings who are still, than men, who are still like the wild creatures who don't perform any responsibilities and live a self-centered lifestyle. So, but I don't think there are different roles for women during these crises. It's the same. Everybody has to behave in the same similar and not self-serving manner in the service that we are supposed to provide. So I wouldn't even have answered this question.
Thank you, sir. One more question from a woman, Visakha Panchal. She is asking that overall, we see that this pandemic affecting our economy, and the economy is overall as a kind of resource management. So, what we can learn from Mahatma Gandhi's principle, like economy related management of resources in the time of pandemic?
But I think if independent India had followed the Gandhian ideal of how he wanted India to develop, to make every village a center of production, and the village production supplying to the needs of the cities, we would not have had this economic crisis in the time of pandemic when our industry is almost shut down because of the lack of the accessibility to raw materials and accessibility to the labor that our industries require, because the workforce is back in the villages, and the plight of the workforce back in the villages is compounded because there is no source of income for them over there, because we have not created those kind of things. These fancy terms of Atmanirbhar Bharat and all that sound very good, but when you look at it, compare it with Bapu's ideal of Swadeshi, you realize that before Bapu talked about Swadeshi, he had worked to revive the traditional cottage industries for which India was renowned. He created the entire Khadi industries concept. He made a realization that everybody could become a production center to provide for the consumers. So that is what is lacking in today's time, and that is the inspiration. It's too late today to be able to cure what ails our economy because of the pandemic, because we have neglected it for 70 years. So we have to suffer the consequences. But we must prepare for the future. Shift the focus of production from our metropolis to our villages, to our hamlets, to empower them to become the production centers and provide goods for the consumption of the cities. Because the production in the cities is not sustainable, not ecologically sustainable, and not physically actually sustainable either. Because as soon as production shifts to the metros, the cost of production naturally goes up. But if that was in the villages, because the requirement of transport would be lessened, the cost of production itself would go down, and products and produce from the villages would be much, much more economically viable than it is today. If we had acted even, 4 decades ago to create this kind of India, we might have been in a better situation. But it's no use crying over split milk at this point of crisis. Now we have to suffer the consequences of it. But we can start preparing for a future. I think that is the lesson that we can take from Gandhi for our economic. I see a question in Hindi from Devesh Kumar Dev. Should I read it out or will you read it?
No, sir, there is no question in Hindi, only
There
comment.
is. I see it in the chat window.
Chat comments, chat. So we are taking questions only, and the last questions from my side as a panel, as a host. Sir, we see that pandemic, how to manage the pandemic like a coronavirus for some time. It is matter of a discipline, as individual discipline, as like guidelines we have to follow. I, I want to know that how we can like impart Gandhian, Mahatma Gandhi's discipline in today's youth, especially in the matter of the individual discipline. How we can impart Gandhi discipline in youth? That is my question, sir.
I think it can only happen through our own actions. It can only happen through our own lifestyle. We have to become the living examples of what we want to impart to the children. We love to become teachers, we love to become guides, and we love to preach to the youth on the ideal practices and way of life. But the youth is inspired much more from our actions and our practices than from our words, because they are very intelligent and clever to realize that our words are meaningless because they see the contradiction in our lifestyles. So, unless we become the inspirations through our actions, we are never going to be able to instill these values in the coming generation.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for your very key answer. And
Thank you.
our attendees really benefited, we hope. And I send over the speaker to our coordinator.
Okay, before proposing a formal vote of thanks, I hope our honorary vice chancellors might have some concluding observations. Sir,
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your kind, enlightening presentation, and you have relevantly discussed all the issues, and it's a wonderful presentation, sir. Thank you very much, sir. I will
Thank you.
share the, yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
now we are reaching the second of our program, and before dispersing, I'd like to propose a brief vote of thanks from the chair. Today, Mizoram University is very fortunate to have a great speaker who happens to be the great grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. There is no one, as I guess, there is no one who, there is no one in India who doesn't know names like Mahatma Gandhi. This is my idea. Even within Mizoram, even those rural dwellers are very much in the know of names like Mahatma Gandhi. And today, we are listening to a great lecture or speech, not from someone, but from the great grandson of Mahatma Gandhi ji. That's why I express my heartfelt thanks to our speaker. And secondly, I must express our sincere thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor KRS Simbasibra, who is very much enthusiastic about academic advancement in our university. And he knows how to make the people work and improve their quality academically. This is a good sign for all the faculty members of Mizoram University. And today, only two of us appear here, but our friends are also watching, means committee members of this celebration of 150 years of Gandhi's birth anniversary. And today, I'd like to say thank you to our friends. First, to Professor Srinivas Pati. I guess he's also watching this program now. Then, I would also like to express our sincere thanks to another member, Professor Esquela Nimpuifente. I guess he's also watching this program now. And our teamwork is very good, and we have been organizing not more than one or two, three programs, but so many programs. And today, I'd also like to express our heartfelt thanks to all the attendees, not only from India, but also from outside the country. And I hope these great lectures would enrich our knowledges about Gandhiji and his philosophy, and it is my sincere wish that Gandhiji's philosophies, his philosophy of Satyagraha and others would have a big say in our daily lives. And if we can inculcate or imbibe good things and ideals from Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy, the people in India must move a little bit forward in improving our morality and virtues, so on and so forth. The last but not the least, as the organizing committee and as the chair of this program, I say thank you to our speakers and our vice chancellors, pro-vice chancellors, and all other attendees. Thank you very much. Now we can close the webinar program.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, sir. My best wishes to all of you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. I'll close, okay.